Hello and welcome to the channel, and today's video is going to be about understanding macronutrients for fat loss. Macronutrients, or macros for short, are proteins, fats and carbohydrates that are made up from the foods that you consume as part of your diet. Protein is 4 calories per gram, fats are 9 calories per gram, and carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram as well. So straight off the bat, you can see fats are probably the most expensive in terms of calories per gram. Once you've worked out your total calorie target that puts you in a calorie deficit to lose weight, the next step is then to work out how many grams of protein, how many grams of fat, and how many grams of carbohydrates you're going to have in your diet to support your training and goals. But generally, the best thing to do with fat loss is to always start with protein. I would recommend starting with 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight as a base point, and then for personal preference and obviously training experience, scale it up from there. Obviously, protein is incredibly satiating. It will help you stay fuller for longer. So when you're in a deficit, you're not going to feel as hungry as much. Also, it's going to help when you are recovering from resistance training, promoting muscle tissue and growth and adaptation in your strength work. Also, it's going to help you retain the muscle mass that you had before starting out on your journey and improving your body composition. So once you've got your protein target and your total calorie target, you can work out how many remaining calories you have from your total and how you want to distribute those calories into grams of carbohydrates and grams of fat. Now, there's no real right or wrong with fats and carbohydrates. It really is down to personal preference. So if you prefer to have a higher fat diet, then obviously you're going to lower your carbohydrates and use more of your calories towards the fats. Whereas if you have more performance-based goals, a bit more experience in the gym, then I'd probably recommend you skew your calories more towards carbohydrates so that you're fueling your workouts and aiming to improve your performance in the gym as well. The other benefit of going with a higher carbohydrate diet and slightly lower fats is that if you have a big appetite and if you like bigger meals, you're going to have more food volumes. Your meal's going to look larger on the plate and probably fill you up a little bit more than they would do if you went with more fats in your diet and lower carbohydrates. Because obviously fats are much denser in calories, they're not going to be so visible on the plate. For instance, if you have butter, oils, nuts, seeds, things like that, very healthy and good for you, but obviously very nutrient dense and relatively small on the plate. So if you're someone that enjoys big meals, then I'd recommend having more carbohydrates and going with a lower fat diet. Another option, if you're not sure if you want to do more fats or more carbs, is to take a more flexible approach with your macronutrient tracking. And this is something I've spoken about in one of my other videos, which I suggest you go and watch, which talks about different ways of tracking. Now, with this, you could basically track your total calories and your protein target, and then have the flexibility to either on any given day consume more fats or more carbohydrates, but as long as you don't exceed your total calorie intake. That's really key. The only real one we're focusing on when you're doing that type of tracking is protein, because again, it helps with recovery, it helps with satiation, and it helps with building muscle tissue and changing your body composition. One of the most common mistakes I see with tracking, especially when people are trying to lose weight, is at the end of the day when they check their calories and they're going, oh, I've gone over, I've missed my target, and I'm not losing weight, is probably because some of the choices they're making with protein or even some of the other macronutrients contain more of fats, for instance, or more of the carbohydrates than they intended. And then of course it adds up over the course of the day. A good example of this being if someone's eating a large amount of fattier meats like lamb, chicken thighs, beef, all those sorts of foods, which are great for you and very healthy. But of course, if you're having a lot of high fat meat throughout the course of the day, that's going to add up and more than likely take you over your calorie target. So you're going to have to be aware of how many fats you're consuming in some of the protein sources that you're choosing. So obviously you don't want to exclude fattier cuts of meat from your diet or proteins because they're good for you and it's important to have these in your diet for your long-term health. But you do need to think about how frequently you're having these foods over the course of a week, a month, or even a day. And as an example, if you know you're going out for a burger and chips in the evening or a steak or whatever it might be that's quite high in fat, or even sausages and mash or something like that, or a roast dinner even, you know that it's going to be quite high in fat and protein. So the rest of the day needs to be a bit leaner. So maybe you're going to go for some white fish during the day. Maybe you're going to go for some tuna. Maybe you're going to have some turkey. Maybe you have some tofu, for instance. So you're going to go for lower fat options of protein the rest of the day because you know you've consumed a higher fat protein source at any given part of the day. So it's just being more thoughtful about the consumptions of fats. It's not necessarily kind of eliminating those foods, but you're just giving them a higher price tag and not spending all of your calories in one day or 1 week. Okay, so now we've covered proteins. Hopefully you have a better understanding of them now, what the leaner cuts are versus the fattier cuts, and how to navigate that when you're trying to lose body fat. Okay, so moving on to carbohydrates now, your body's preferred fuel source. Think of these as your energy or fuel for workouts, for everyday life, and also kind of the foundations of your dinner plate or your lunchtime meals, or any meal in fact. These are going to form the foundations of your meal to help keep you full and to keep you satisfied, and obviously provide you with the fiber you need for good digestion. And if you're thinking, oh no, I can't eat carbs because they'll spike my insulin and make me fat, that's completely untrue, and the evidence shows this now. So you can consume carbohydrates and not gain weight, and it's perfectly normal for your body's response to spike its insulin to proteins and carbohydrates. But don't worry if it does spike your insulin, it's not going to make you fat. What you do need to worry about is being in a calorie surplus, because the minute you eat too many calories, that's when you're going to gain weight. So now we've got that silly myth out the way. These are the types of carbohydrates you can have in your diet, still lose weight, but fuel your life and fuel your workouts. Pastas, rice, grains, potatoes, breads. All these foods are great and good for you, and you can consume them and still lose weight. Then there's your vegetables, which are still technically a carbohydrate, but they're much lower in the net carbs that you get from them versus having more starchier versions. The cool thing about vegetables is that it fills up your plate, similar to more starchier versions, but at a much lower cost per calorie. And then obviously there's the fiber benefit that helps with your digestion. So when it comes to spending your calories, carbohydrates are a great investment for your fueling of your workouts and for keeping you fuller for longer, especially when you're trying to lose weight in a calorie deficit. And finally, moving on to fats, and I have to be honest, probably a little bit of my own bias is slipping into this video. I do tend to have a high protein, high carb diet, which keeps my fats lower. I do enjoy fattier foods, but I just tend to eat less of them. But that being said, let's move into fats anyway. And good sources of fats are avocados, nuts, seeds, oils, fish, so even butters as well, all important in a balanced diet. And you can consume these and still lose weight. The only issue is you just need to be more controlled and measured with the amount you're having of these foods, of these fats, because as you know, they will cost you a substantial amount of calories when you do consume them. And that reduces the food volume over the course of the day. So again, if you're someone that likes larger meals, you're going to struggle when you're having more fats in those meals because the density of the meal increases, but also the size reduces. So it's always worth considering that when you're dieting. As a little tip, if you're going to be having a high fat meal or a high fat meat, for instance, like chicken wings, then I'd probably encourage you to go low carb that day because you're likely to have more fats in the meals and how they're cooked without exceeding your total calories. So just a little tip when you're navigating your days, if you are going to be having a higher fat day, for instance, just drop the carbs. And it comes back into what I was saying earlier about tracking, having a total protein target and total calorie target, and that it doesn't really matter how much you consume in terms of carbohydrates and fats, as long as you remain within your target number of calories, you will still lose weight. Anyway, that's everything on today's video about understanding macronutrients for fat loss. I hope you found this helpful, and if you did, please drop us a like and subscribe, and make sure you turn up for next week's video. See you then.